you all, but you can unmute yourselves. And I'll go live on Facebook in a second. Okay.
Are we good?
Yep, you can start.
Welcome everybody to Lit Balm number 111. And today we are delighted to feature Lynn Melnick, Shira Denz, Caroline Hagood, and Erika Wurth. But before we get to the feature, let me introduce to you one of our founders who's not here today, Jonathan Penton, who founded Unlikely Stories in 1998. He has lent his editorial and management assistance to many artistic and literary ventures, such as the New Orleans Poetry Festival and Big Bridge. He founded Unlikely Books, which publishes 3 to 5 books of poetry a year. He's organized literary performances and performed himself across the United States. His poetry books are Last Chap, Blood and Salsa, Prosthetic Gods, and Standards of Sanity from Litfest Press, and the free chapbook Backstories, which you can download from Argotist ebooks. I think Cassandra's going to read one of Jonathan's poems.
I am going to read one of Jonathan's poems. I'm going to dedicate it to his beautiful dog, who's unwell at the moment. It's called Heroic Man, and it's an ekphrastic poem that is based on the New Orleans Sculpture Garden sculptures. My skull is very small. Everyone notices. People describe me as having a wisdom of the body. In some mouths, that means I'm beautiful. In all mouths, that means I'm a fool. Now I am scarred, covering one arm, both shoulder blades, down one scapula. Now the wisdom of my body is calloid. My skull no longer houses the windows to my soul. And that's Jonathan Penton's poem.
And next we hear from Cassandra herself, who is an award-winning writer, scholar of prose poetry, and professor of writing and literature in Melbourne, Australia. Her most recent books of prose poetry are Pre-Raphaelite, Leftovers, and Fugitive Letters. She's currently writing a book of prose poetry on the atomic bomb with funding from the Australia Council. Cassandra co-wrote prose poetry, An Introduction, which came out with Princeton U Press, fantastic book, kind of basically gives you the whole story from start to finish. And of course, also Australian Post, the anthology Australian Prose Poetry. Cassandra's commissioning editor of Wesley Magazine and associate editor also of the Mad Hat Press imprint Far Flung Editions, which we have brought out now so far 2 books and 1 forthcoming from the New Zealand poet Elizabeth Smithers. So keep an eye out for that. What you got for us?
Yeah. Elizabeth's super famous and her poetry's wonderful. She's probably one of the most famous living New Zealand poets. I've got a little poem that has the epigraph from The Great Gatsby. I lived at West Egg. Across the Courtesy Bay, the white palaces of fashionable East Egg glittered along the water. And it goes like this. At the hotel, they have sex on 2 pushed together double beds. They call them West Egg and East Egg. With the room still icy from the air conditioner, they sleep under West Egg's expansive duvet. At 3 a.m., she whispers, time to migrate before they clamber across to East Egg's satin sheets. One day, while she straddles the eggs, the beds separate and she falls into the divide. He drags her back by the arms, kissing her bruises. Her skin is mauved in the purple light of the digital alarm clock. And I would like to introduce the incredible Mark Vincennes, who is an Anglo-Swiss American poet, a fiction writer, translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He has published over 20 books of poetry because he drinks so much coffee, or he used to, including more recently Einstein Fledermaus, The Little Book of Earthly Delights, A Brief Conversation with Consciousness, There Might Be a Moon or a Dog from Gazebo Books in Australia, and 39 Wonders and Other Management Issues just released from Spite and Dival. He also has The Pearl Diver of Irun Mani forthcoming in early 2023 from White Pine Press. If that isn't enough, an album of music, ambience and verse, Left Hand Clapping, is forthcoming from Tree Torn Records. Vincenz is also a prolific translator, and he's translated, everyone here knows, from the German, Romanian, and French. He has published 11 books of translations, most recently an Audible Blue Selected Poems 1963 to 2016 by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist, Klaus Mertz, just out from White Pine Press. He is currently working on a brilliant novel entitled The Age of Occasions. Vincenz is editor and publisher of Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He has lived all over the world, joined in from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born in Matilda Hospital on the Peak in Hong Kong, but he now lives on a farm in rural Western Massachusetts overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, Melville's inspiration for Moby Dick, where there are more, drumroll, hoary bats, long-tailed weasels, and northern short-tailed shrews than people. We always love to wait for the ending of your bio, Mark, and I hope you can tame those short-tailed shrews. Over to you.
Has anyone ever seen a short-tailed shrew? That is a question. Of course, out where we live, here we have lots of voles and mice, of course, field mice. And they like to get into the basement, but I actually have banished them now for probably about a year. I haven't seen a single mouse. It may have something to do with the fact that we have our new dog, Millie, Emily Dickinson, writing poems on the floor above them. But at any rate, the long-tailed shrew is something to be aware of. This is a prose poem which is part of my novella, City of Lemons. And it is one chapter in the book. It's 1.5 pages. 23,417, the number of folk to turn over tonight, the number of souls crushed to dust. Count them on all your 7 fingers, I thought. Then the anteater had a thought. I remember once in the old world when Zimmer's bookstore still had an awning. I must have been, 15? At that time, the precepts were not so strict, and old man Zimmer's portrait hung high over the register, gazing down with condescending eyes. What are you reading tonight? They asked. At first, I stuck to the classics, the Antediluvian Wells, the Velusian Diaries, the Idols of Usefulness, and high upon the top shelf, out of old man Zimmer's line of sight, Yves Saint Elixir's backfiring motorcycles. All this via Parliament, before the Constitution was repealed and each city was on its own speaking terms. But then, on a foggy day in my own still city of lavender, over tea and secret shots of dynamite and a breeze that drew off the Atlantic, young man Zimmer showed me his father's secrets. From way before the stone was ever extracted, when governments tumbled upon each other and every military coup was a president and 5 credits could buy you a beer and the world was full of books. Words rained down even when you were not there. Back then, they were all marionettes, their limbs wired and backfired, and few paid attention. Young man Zimmer and I did our shots behind the sociology section. We smoked a Cuban cigar and touched each other's chests. My Angora sweater upheld all his caresses. Still, the incense in the shop, patchouli, I recall, or perhaps it was the Havanese cigar, led us to believe that everything in our lives had led us to this moment. We were of one mind, he and I, and that afternoon, in his father's secret chambers, he showed me books from every corner of the globe, every written period of history, mysteries, and untold fortunes, unspeakable prayers, and incantations. In those old days, they had bound their knowledge in leather and vellum and paper, so fine it could fly. It was such a simple thing, this moment of shared wisdom. All we had to do was pretend. Thank you. And now I'm delighted to introduce the first of our features tonight, and that will be Lynn Melnick, who's the author of the memoir, I've Had to Think Up a Way to Survive on Trauma, Persistence, and Dolly Parton. She's also the author of 3 poetry collections, including more recently, Refusenik. Welcome, Lynn.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am going to read from chapter 5 of my memoir. This is what my memoir looks like. It is a memoir and it is also a love song to Dolly Parton. So her music and to her cultural impact. So I'm going to read the opening pages of the Jolene chapter with the assumption that even if you don't know Dolly's work very well, you do know the song Jolene, and if you don't, it's pretty easy to find. So here we go. Of all of Dolly's records, Jolene has most endured, her best known and most beloved hit. It is the one people recognize and remember, the one people meme and tweet about, the one my primary care doctor told me he covers with his weekend band, the one that inspired an avant-garde art installation in 2007 in New York City, the one Nelson Mandela is said to have played from his prison cell, the one that prompts response and parody songs. Jolene is almost inescapable. The iconic guitar riff, the beseeching repetition, but it's not my favorite of Dolly's songs, probably not even in my top 5. Why is this the one? My husband Timothy can't stand it. It's the kind of oppressive sound that if you heard it coming from a machine, you'd be like, "Stop that sound," he said when I asked him to tell me why. If that song was a person at a party, I would avoid that person. I laughed because I love a strong opinion on pop culture even when it's wrong. He Googled, "Why do I hate Jolene?" and reported, "Nope, everyone else seems to love it." For a song that's seemingly simple with so few words, there is an astonishing complexity to Jolene. It is a song of desperation, pleading, and obsessiveness. Its chorus climbs an octave, then climbs back down, ending right where it started, then starts again, repeating the name of the singer's rival over and over. It is haunting. It is relentless. The opening riff is so instantly recognizable that it might challenge the opening notes of the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction or Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit in the public consciousness. The Boot, a popular online country music news site, ranked the riff in Jolene number 2 in their article Country Music's Top 10 Guitar Riffs, just behind Johnny Cash's beloved I Walk the Line. It's a great chord progression. People love that Jolene lick, Dolly told NPR in 2008. It's as much a part of the song almost as the song. As it continues, the chord progressions differ between the song's verses and the chorus, a move perhaps hardly noticeable except that the music shakes us up, makes us listen harder, and again. Dolly wrote Jolene in 1972, the year my brother Cliff was born, and she released it as a single on October 22, 1973, a few weeks before I arrived. Although nominated for 2 Grammys at the time, it didn't win one until it was nominated again as part of Dolly's collaboration in 2016 with the hokey a cappella group Pentatonix, one of the more recent of the hundreds of acts to cover the song over the decades. Olivia Newton-John did it disco. The Sisters of Mercy went goth with it. Chiquis Rivera and Becky G recorded a Spanish-language cumbia pop take. The White Stripes cover made it cool with a hipster crowd. Lil Nas X performed a slow, urgent acoustic version in 2021. Mindy Smith recorded a version for the 2003 Dolly tribute album, Just Because I'm a Woman, and the breakthrough song of Smith's career was said by Dolly to be her favorite cover of the song. Smith's intense relationship to its vulnerability might also make it mine. For an interview with Music City News in 1967, Dolly's first in a major music publication, and published about 3 years after she arrived in Nashville the morning after high school graduation, Dolly had, by her own estimate, already written hundreds of songs. Dolly wrote Jolene and I Will Always Love You at the same time. In a radio interview on the Bobby Bones show, Dolly said, "That was a good writing day." She pauses before day. That was a good writing day. In 2020, in an interview with Time, she mentions finding a cassette with the 2 songs back to back. "You were just shocked," she says. Dolly's songwriting skills get overshadowed by her vocal talent, as does her ability to play multiple instruments, and overshadowed all the more by the lore and the often self-objectification. But imagine writing one song, that still resonates with hundreds of thousands of listeners more than 50 years after you wrote it. Imagine writing 2. On the same day, or thereabouts. Near the end of her life, Marilyn Monroe asked of an unnamed interviewer, "Please don't make me a joke. End the interview with what I believe." Think of Barbara Walters asking Dolly, another blonde bombshell, "Do you feel like you're a joke?" No matter how many brilliant hits Dolly wrote in one day in 1972, some of my very best songs I've written within 30 minutes' time, she told Music City News. Perception of her so often comes down to how she looks. The raw candor in Dolly's Jolene vocals is a departure from her earlier work on songs like 1967's Dumb Blonde and 1969's I Don't Believe You've Met My Baby. In these, Dolly's voice is reminiscent of singers in the Patsy Cline tradition, clear as ever, but so highly stylized it's difficult to uncover the emotion that is Dolly's signature. Jolene turns that almost aggressive reserve on its ear and brings us a sincerity that is painful and impossible to ignore, a sincerity that is her trademark, a sincerity and vulnerability that is, to this moment, I think, mostly unmatched. In a 2008 NPR interview about Jolene, Dolly speaks of the titular subject in typically animated and self-deprecating sentences. She had everything I didn't, like legs. You know, she was about 6 feet tall and had all that stuff that some little short, sawed-off hunky like me don't have. So no matter how beautiful a woman might be, you're always threatened by other women, period. Jolene's a mess, Mindy Smith told NPR's All Things Considered in 2008. She steals things. Jealousy is enmity prompted by fear. Envy is enmity prompted by covetousness. In her book, The Possession, which is about the aftermath of a love affair, Annie Ernaux writes, "It wasn't the other woman, in the end, whom I saw in my place. It was me, the way that I never would be again, in love and sure of his love, on the threshold of everything that hadn't yet taken place between us." To be always threatened by other women is to suggest other women are always out to take what's yours, and recognizably yours, that they even want it, that they are never true to you or themselves, that they are reduced to a thing that is sexy and will take. The speaker pleads with Jolene that her happiness rests on what Jolene decides. In March of 2018, after a cruel but mercifully short battle with cancer, my husband Timothy's best friend, the celebrated poet Lucy Brock-Broido, died. Grief over Lucy hit Timothy hard, crying all the time, falling apart at the funeral, making irrational decisions hard. Lucy had been his mentor, his friend, his confidant, his foil, his love, since they first met in the early 90s. They were hysterical together, in their own world, absurd. When I began spending the night at Timothy's sometimes in the mid-90s, I got used to hearing his clangorous landline at 2 a.m. and the sound of his voice quietly next to me in bed in his tiny bedroom, and Lucy's voice through the line. 20 years later, and from the second floor in our apartment, I'd often wake to the sounds of that same chatter, laughter, into the earliest morning when Timothy would come to bed, and I'd soon get up and get our kids ready for school. Our schedules have always been staggered. He's a night owl, and I thrive on light. Lucy died in the spring, and her public memorial service was held in the fall in the Miller Theater at Columbia University. Almost 700 people filled the room to hear Lucy's friends discuss her quirky brilliance and the particular pleasure of being in her circle. Her poems were read, voices choked up, a slideshow on which Timothy carefully worked with his typical obsessive precision ran during a recording of Lucy reading her poem, Infinite Riches, in the smallest room. What if I were gone and the wind still reeks of hyacinth? What then? Lucy's scent is still with us in a shirt Timothy lovingly folded into a plastic bag as he was cleaning out her New York City apartment. At the memorial, Timothy spoke of their Gemini gifts for Gab, of talking all night, of his deep love for her. "I feel like I'm still on the phone with Lucy Brock-Broido, and I'm never hanging up," he said. "Oh, how I want her back for him." "I miss you. It is May," Lucy wrote in a steno pad she left on their shared desk at the university, and which we came across in a stack of papers and books on our table at home months after she died. After the memorial service, there was a reception under tents and string lights at which her hordes of current and former students attacked the wealth of free food so quickly that by the time Timothy and I got to the tables, they were mostly bare. Timothy kept busy accepting all the condolences. I kept busy worrying that he would not be okay because he was not okay. At the memorial reception, 2 women came up to me separately to ask if I had been jealous. I didn't even understand the question the first time. Jealous of what? Most anyone with whom I regularly chat has heard from me in recent weeks about jealousy. One friend asked, "Wouldn't you be jealous if Timothy was friends with a lot of beautiful women?" And my answer was, "He is, and no." Maybe it's because I always feel like I'm on borrowed time with any of the good fortune I've had, but it's also because I know that love doesn't necessarily exist single file. Timothy and I have found and clung to each other in this life together, no matter. What's more, a gruesome end is inevitable for everything. Ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate, that time will come and take my love away. This thought is as a death which cannot choose, but weep to have that which it fears to lose. Shakespeare, Sonnet 64. In all of country music, there's nothing quite like the sense of accelerating dread that propels Parton's Great Jolene, Tom Carson wrote in Rolling Stone in 1978. Enmity prompted by fear. Maybe I don't let myself have fear to lose. I have never felt romantic or sexual jealousy. I've never doubted that the people I'm with want me and won't stray. I've never felt threatened by other women because I have always gotten the lovers I wanted. No lover had ever left me, Melissa Phoebos writes in her book Abandon Me. I had spent enough years in therapy to know this was not something to brag about. Some wouldn't let me go. The man who threw the bookcase on me followed me to New York City and showed up at my apartment building, where I ran and hid behind the worn rows of mailboxes, and then he showed up at my workplace. He grabbed my arm near the same library at which I'd hold my fellowship years later. He walked with me up Fifth Avenue and then stood us on the famous lion-guarded steps of the 42nd Street branch, telling me that pigeons are really rock doves. My heart beat out of my chest with fear. A woman I'd kissed once harassed me for years, one evening trapping me in a bathroom at a party. Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive and the sounds of enthusiastic dancing muffled through the blocked door, demanding to know why I was so obnoxious, daring not to desire her back. She hates me so much, I still hear from her from time to time. The speaker in Jolene is begging, literally begging, obsessively saying the name of the thing that would harm her most. But why is it Jolene who harms her and not the men who would cheat? Why are women doing all the emotional labor? The singer's man is just happily going about his business, fucking or not fucking Jolene, maybe just flirting, clearly talking about her in his sleep. But I once dreamt that the actor Lawrence Fishburne took me ice skating in Central Park. Maybe he's just being friendly. Maybe his subconscious is hot for Jolene, and that's okay, isn't it? And meanwhile, the speaker is losing her shit, and Jolene is like, I don't even know him. Enmity prompted by covetousness. Here are some of the things which I've been envious. People whose infants slept through the night. People who can digest cheese. Every fashion trend my family couldn't afford or chose not to buy me from about 1982 to 1987. Anyone who lives debt-free. People who can fall asleep right away. Bodies that don't feel the everyday residual pain of the history of being knocked around. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Next we hear from Shira Denz, who's the author of 5 books, including Sisyphusina from Pank 2020, winner of the Eugene Paul Nassau Prize 2021, and 2 chapbooks, including Flounders from Essay Press. Her writing appears in many venues, including Poetry, American Poetry Review, Cincinnati Review, Iowa Review, Gulf Coast, Jubilat Pleiades, Plume, Denver Quarterly, Colorado Review, etc. She's well published, and she's a recipient of an Academy of American Poets Prize, Poetry Society of America's Lyric Poem, and Cecil Hemley Awards, Painted Bride's Quarterly Poetry Prize, and Electronic Poetry Review's Discovery Award. Currently, Shira lives and works in upstate New York and is a visiting poet 2022 at the University of South Dakota. Her website is www.shiradenz, one word with a T, .com. Welcome, Shira.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you everybody who is here. And Lynn, that was totally beautiful and moving, and a whole range of emotions. So really great. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to read a few new poems, and my most recent book, by the way, is is titled Sisyphusina. So it's a female Sisyphus, since I believe in equal opportunity. And so I needed to get a Sisyphusina in on the into the literary tradition as well. Okay. So the first poem I'm going to read is Salvation. Skin the colors of brick, peeling below the surface, without a light in the house, near or far. Rush in, raps on the window, a cardinal who won't go away. Some think the bird could be a mystic or reincarnation of someone lost. Animate for the birds, heather, feather, spine central, a spine essential to all endeavors. A seahorse curls on a branch, rings of light multiply overnight. Dread hangs like a window shade cord. Had it. To drift nonsensically into late age without a hat on is bald and bold. Lately, been a lot of talk about nice in relation to good. I ask the seahorse for a favor, even knowing they're a cluster of leaves on a branch, a backward prayer, stomach rounded upward, skinning space. And this is sense violence. The heart is a flint in a cashmere night, whisking and howling in the open margin of a door. Beseech the wool of time to unsnag on its crest of speed coming our way. Won't winter snake its way back, an easing coat? Mint and tulips wind the eyes, each on its own stair, pulled upward like ocean waves, lamenting gravity. You like the print of mountains received into night's wind. The rectangular narrow way whisking is the margin easing. Beseech time and won't howling gravity open? Beseech the open margin of mountains. We lament our way, like ocean waves lamenting and howling gravity. The margin and Carmen crest. This is spores, like Kusama's dots, roofing spherically above. Leaves graze the street, the storm's only debris. The mob of raindrops on the bathroom window long took off. We'd hoped for more fanfare. After the first thunder blast split open the meat we're made of. To not return to our revolving limbo, lazy Susan, of thick and thin choices. August's comet debris shower peaked today. Meteorites as fungi. The cycle of decay and regeneration, visceral only to those marking it, otherwise a goner, like pre-birth. Okay, and now a little bit of a change, sort of. This is Maglow. The golden nugget of witdom. In early times, it was a glow or glam. For the living, it's a dart, shuffling in the air like a slipper, but vertical as a beanstalk, without a top to climb. Maglow. Late air. A dark crystal dives like a bird, trees wagging leaves like sleeves, ranking puzzle pieces in the middle rainbow, oscillating dice cast interpretations. The world is setting close and narrow, without enough quiet, as in private. Summer moons fly with the bait, rootless as money. Oh, I mean honey in hives. Green ways. We hate being stopped. A billion gears inside, the moon now alight, like all the other lights. We're new now, like kids, seeing farther in the dark. The dying star looks like salmon meat to our eyes. The swell of things. So I've been writing, not intentionally, but I've been writing a series of Hagood poems. And it's not like I write them one after another, but I just keep every once in a while doing another Hagood. I have Hagood again, another Hagood, and this one is Hagood, oh God. Green velvet collars stiff around preening necks and their triangles. Fate, one might say, is geometric as an equivalence. We want to stay awake. It's melon green wash with another color that can't be seen long enough to name. Light ringlets are our new juice at twilight. Mornings, a Rothko sky spills liquid light from and against its bottom edge, like the inside of a creme brulee. Until recently, Earth held an equivalence of weight among all species, whales and insects, for instance. We all like a good meringue, peaks holding stiff as collars, or the freeze of a wave. Song. The moon misted, then showed itself. Is this about the moon again? Is this wish for a god like the moon coming into view at a certain pulse, or a shed snakeskin, fragile, beautiful, and ominous in what it recalls? The moon sneaks out from behind trees, the only thing we look at squarely while losing everything else. A gift, our drishti, to help us poise on one leg. And I think that I am going to read, I'm going to read two more poems, one really short, and then I'm going to show a video poem. Do I have time for that? Okay, all right. So this is why part 2. When anxiety becomes circumference, you are a hangnail in need of soaking. Waking is hard, too much waiting, wasting wings waving, iridescent clouds, reflecting opalescent in midnight pools. To stir or not to stir, the measure of a half moon, a profile of speech, light, and sense, marauding to the tune of chants. Dot, dot, dot. But instead of being a woodpecker, I'll rubber band the wind rush to hold like a bouquet. Okay, this is the last short one, and I'm gonna show a short video poem. Crown. Some birds can sleep while flying, half their body awake, one wing flapping. If only we could, body awake, one wind in sea silver. First, I want to make sure everybody can see. Can you see? All right, so let me make sure that this goes back. Wait, maybe I should test this first before I do this. Sorry, everybody.
Watch real providers discuss real Dupixent patient stories.
Why does this have to happen like this? All right. Okay, we were talking before about what different things that can happen with Zoom. So we needed to get a little demonstration. We had to do show, not just tell. Okay, here we go. I got it. Okay. All right, so this is called Quipu, and it's a okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Shira. Next, we hear from Caroline Hagood, who is an assistant professor of literature writing and publishing and director of undergraduate writing at St. Francis College in Brooklyn. Caroline is the author of 2 poetry books, a novel, and the book-length essays, Ways of Looking at a Woman and Weird Girls, forthcoming. Her novel Art Monster is also forthcoming early 2023 from Spine and Dival. Her work has appeared in publications including Electric Literature, Creative Nonfiction, Lit Hub, The Kenyan Review, The Huffington Post, The Guardian, Salon, and Elle. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I do just want to say that when Mark reached out to me and asked, what were some exciting writers, that I could bring together, it's so nice to come to this day and be able to share each of their different projects with you, and what I think of as the really unusual and fierce work that they're producing. So this is really, really nice for you to get to hear it. Yes, so I will be reading from the book Weird Girls. The cover art is, this is my 5th time working with this artist, Robin Tews. And she hasn't produced any of the art for my books, but it's felt like she has each time. Like I would go look at her art and it would feel like, it was produced for this book. So anyway, I love her, Robin Tews, she's great. So yeah, I'm writing about the idea of the art monster in this essay collection. And so this idea of the artist who is historically often been male, who gets to be completely dedicated to the work, and how this, isn't always allowed to women because of these sort of domestic reasons. And basically, I was just reading every essay that writers were writing on this concept, and I just thought, I think I have to write a book about this. And I also took up the idea of the monster. Why was it art monster? What was this connection between monsters and creativity? Anyway, I will just read. Okay. If gender is both a prison and a performance, I was tired of the restrictive theater in which I said sorry over and over until I died. At the same time, as Paul Thoreau's description of being a man as wearing an ill-fitting coat shows, there's stuff wrong with being a man too. So I didn't want to be part of either camp when it came to writing. I just wanted to relate to my paper without any of that nonsense coming between us, but it's easier said than done. Maybe all our minds are made of things more nuanced than either sugar and spice and everything nice, or slugs and snails and puppy dog tails. Personally, I'm beginning to suspect that my mind is composed of Bengal tigers and thickets of nightshade. I have always felt I needed to be prepared to lead a rebel army in a dystopian novel. Not that anybody would necessarily know this about me. I seem pleasing, a huge part of the problem, and cheerful, and in many ways I am. I'm the textbook Brooklyn mother, but here's the thing. I need to stop being pleasant, a woman constructed for your pleasures. I need to talk filthy if I need to. I am here to take no prisoners, except for you. You're kind of cute. But let's be honest, that won't happen. I have 2 kids. I go to sing-alongs and coffee shops when I get a sitter. I do more of the cooking, grind spices with mortar and pestle. I worry over every little thing for my kids, even though they live the lives of emperors. And really, the only thing they suffer from is being too lucky. I procreate that, and I lope around my house like an intruder, eating all the sweet things in the cupboard in a counterintuitive attempt to lose the baby weight. I write. I teach. I vow to write the great American novel, but mostly I just sit in my son's beanbag chair, eating flaming hot Cheetos. I wonder if there's someone out there, though, who can read the more difficult text of me, even as I put on this act of having normal feelings when I'm in public, like, oh yeah, everything's fine. Work has been tough, and can you believe this winter? Now take that weirdo and make her a mother. Give her all the related bodily surprises and emotional ups and downs and see what happens. I mean, it's like a weird science experiment gone awry. Bill Nye the Science Guy type of stuff. Jumping around a little here. But sometimes I meet a woman and there's this electric current between us, like a third person in the room, a haunting of connection. In the rare cases that I felt this, probably a handful of times in my life, I've imagined that she could feel it too. Maybe it's a kind of shared language between women the world regards as, for lack of a better term, just too much. Too much for their husbands or girlfriends or boyfriends or wives or parents or work buddies, just too much, monstrous. So many of the women writers I have mentally curated, I saw later were the ones, I would guess, who would be called too much and who would be drawn to the creative implications of the monstrous as opposed to repelled by them. And then I saw it. I was building a coven. My kids and I share a fascination with the monster. Or perhaps it's more precise to say that, like most children, mine are both drawn to and repelled by monsters. I chase my kids around the house while roaring loudly, and they love it. We tell monster stories together for hours. It's funny because I can see even now how we're building the basis for their lifelong relationship to monsters and to narrative. My children always want stories with some sort of monster in them, even if they must pay the price of being scared at bedtime. I tell them, this is just how adults feel about the monstrous. My own metamorphosis came about as I followed my guides, my art monster coven of women. Sure, I had always loved monsters and writing, but it wasn't until I had to fight for my art against a torrent of motherhood's many duties, pressures, and expectations that threaten to annihilate my writing that I transformed from pleasing young woman into art monster. Okay, so I'm a work in progress and much braver on the page. I still have to edit out the apologies in all that I do and am, but hopefully I'm on my way. The monster is about transgressing borders, bodies, and identities, which is always what writing does for me. So I tell my children these stories that create a world for them in which they can never truly live, but almost, and this is what makes it shimmer so. I create for them an inner womb of stories since mine is no longer in season, which they can carry with them always, populated by myths and monsters, just as my parents did for me. During the day, my children beg me to play the monster and pursue them, bumbling, wrapped in beach towels, around the living room. But at night, they become afraid of the monster. Before bed, we do the various ornate rituals that enable them to actually go the fuck to sleep. Takes forever. And not fear things that go bump in the night. This involves me squishing into their tiny beds and holding on to them like all of our lives depend on it. I've never been able to do anything at half-mast, particularly not when it comes to adoring these screwy, marvelous little people who are somehow gifted to me. And then it starts, the monster questions. Are there monsters on the moon? Are there any nice monsters? One night, I really just want to go to sleep. So I tell them, you don't have to be afraid of monsters because I'm queen of the monsters. I'm mommy monster. And they're all afraid of me. As I'm leaving the room, I hear a little voice, my daughter's. I love you, mommy monster. And it just sounds so right. Okay.
Thank you. And it just sounds so right. Erika T. Wurth's novel White Horse was published with Flatrion Macmillan and is an indie next pick. Erika is also a Kenyan and Sewanee Fellow. She's published in the Kenyan Review, BuzzFeed, and the Writers' Chronicle, and is a narrative artist for the Meow Wolf Denver installation. She's a professor of creative writing at Western Illinois University and faculty at the low-res MFA at Regis University. She's an urban native of Apache, Chickasaw, Cherokee descent. She was represented by Rebecca Friedman and Dana Spector for film. She lives in Denver with her partner, stepkids, and 2 incredibly fluffy dogs. Welcome, Erika.
Thank you. And they are fluffy, but they like to interrupt with barks. So there's one of them right there. Boop. I'm going to read an incredibly short most of a chapter of White Horse. It's actually out with Flatiron November 1st, so it's not quite out yet. It's a literary indigenous horror novel, but the sort of log line is the main character, Carrie, loves heavy metal and she loves horror, but she despises her mother because she believes her mother abandoned her when she was 2 days old. And her super sweet, well-intentioned white cousin, Debbie, finds this ancient bracelet of her mother's. And the minute Carrie touches it, her mother starts haunting her. And then this kind of evil Bigfoot character starts invading her dreams, and she decides she has to find out what happened to her mother after all. So. I am 15 years old when I tell Jamie to get the fuck out of my house. I gleefully popped my cherry earlier that year in the basement of a house on an old mattress, wine sick, but ready to get this part of my life over with. I remember there had been a toy truck underneath me as he came. I flung it into the darkness, listening to a child crying somewhere in the distance, sounding lost. Jamie and I were drunk on the whiskey and cokes conned from men we chatted up in a bar in Denver. We'd hitched one Saturday night, ready for adventures of the kind that could not be had in a small town that sat at the bottom of a mountain, the trees swaying above our trailers, our dingy houses, our wild, furious hearts. We had told the men at the bar that we were in our 20s, and they had laughed and said they'd love to buy us drinks, love to take us home. I'd been drawn to the taller one because he was wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt. I thought that band had gone a little soft, but they were Jamie's favorite band, and I still liked what this minor metalhead and his friend, who laughed like a donkey, seemed to be offering. What they were offering: experience. Even at that age, I'd learned that I liked to work my way in slow, though I was never what you would call subtle. I knew what I wanted, and they had it. A little cash, enough for drinks, packs of cigarettes poking out of their tight, slightly dirty jeans, the hint of an adventure that held just a little bit of danger. If I was honest with myself, it was especially the last thing. This was the time that I learned to test myself, test my limits, find out what I could do and come back from, what I could do and survive. I had decided that we would go home with them when one of them asked me what it was like to live in Idaho Springs. There was something about his tone, mocking, superior, cruel even. Up until then, we'd been having a great time, bonding over metal, arguing, my long brown hand slamming playfully down on the arm of the man who'd been supplying us with cigarettes all night. I'd been wondering what his thighs looked like under those jeans, what it would be like to get on top of them. What do you mean by that? I asked, my eyes going flat as a cat's. He blinked rapidly. He was dark-eyed, tall, long-haired. I remember thinking when we first let them approach us that he was the kind of man I would have wanted as a boyfriend, if I was the kind of person who would ever want that. Even then, I knew that wasn't for me, but there were some things better left untouched. He said, well, it's just, Idaho Springs is full of white trash. Sorry, you're cool though. I had closed my eyes then, and when I opened them, he was looking at me like he just handed me something beautiful, like a dime bag or roses. Do I look like trash to you? I asked. He stammered. Shit, I wasn't even white. I lit a smoke and squinted up at him, Jamie babbling nervously in the background, my hand fluttering behind me, trying to shut her up. His friend told me I looked like a hot piece of ass. I am a hot piece of ass, I said. He laughed his donkey laugh. You laugh like a donkey, I said. His mouth clapped shut, then a minute later opened again with, you trash bitch. I smiled, and his friend told us both to cool it. He said that's not what I meant, and that there was good shit at his place, that we could just forget about what he said. I told him I couldn't forget, but that he should remember that trash rejected him. He shrugged, knowing it was over. I grabbed Jamie's hand and pulled. She was angry with me, told me to calm down, Carrie, said the guy said they hadn't meant it, that we should go home with them and have some fun. I told her dead-eyed that she'd be going home with them on her own then, and she stalked towards the exit, and then stalked towards the exit, smoking as I did. A few minutes later, she was beside me, pouting. I started walking, my thumb out. I told her to have some fucking dignity. She was silent. We found a ride, a truck that was going west. It dropped us off at the outskirts of the city, the place where the grasslands began to meet the mountains. And eventually we found a ride going all the way to the springs, but it took a while, our thumbs out in the dark, not far from the mountains where a boy had been killed by a lioness, worried for her cubs when he went jogging past, too close. I didn't speak to her the whole way, just smoked and smoked, glad I'd pulled the pack off the table before I left. Let's see, where was I? Yeah. when we got back, she told me we should just forget about it. Go back to my place, stay drunk. She had some tequila in her bag that she lifted from a liquor store. We walked down the empty streets next to the beat up Victorians, the shacks, the shadows long, the kids asleep who went to sleep, the others like us, just maybe getting started. There was something sad and small and yet almost otherworldly about Idaho Springs, like there were secrets in the cold, rocky ground that might spring up at any time and take you down with him into the dark. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika. And thank you all. I mean, especially thank you, Caroline, for putting this stellar crew together. Thank you, Lynn, Shira, and Erika again, of course. And now I'm going to hand the mic over to my cohort over in Melbourne, Australia, to deal with other issues. But also, before we go there, we should mention that we have next weekend something crazy happening at Lit Balm, crazier than crazy, and it is the Lit Balm Dada Poetry Festival. Do any of you know what Dada is?
Yes.
Tell us, John, what's Dada?
Well, Dada was an art movement that sprang up after the First World War, just lived with a lot of insanity and so on, stuff, you know. And I think it predated surrealism.
Give us a little more than that.
More than that? Oh, gee, I don't know. With the urinal at the art gallery count as Dada?
It was the inception of the surrealist movement, right? Dada was nonsense, or well, it was like turning everything on its head, right?
Right.
It was the beginning of surrealism, and Dada led into surrealism, which led into everything that is what we call postmodern today, on some level, right?
I don't know if would you say surrealism led into postmodernism? I don't know.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Without surrealism, I say this pretty blatantly, without surrealism, we would not have the internet today. For example, I say these big cultural movements that happened, if you want to classify them as such, you know, from Dadaism to surrealism to minimalism to, well, Cubism, and if these movements hadn't happened, we wouldn't be, you know, in a virtual world half of the time.
So Rene Magritte invented the internet.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Ce n'est pas un pipe.
It certainly isn't. Well, it could be a data pipe, but never mind.
Anyway, back to Cassandra for our live open mic.
I missed it last week, and thanks for the impression of my Australian accent. Always a treat. So we have some amazing people, we have some regulars, and we have, to kick us off, Dennis Fermento, who is new, and he's going to give us something wonderful, I can tell. Dennis, are you there? Can you unmute yourself? Maybe or maybe not.
Yeah, here I am. Here I am.
Hooray.
Okay, now I have to find my doggone poem because it's on a PDF. And there it is. Okay. This is a translation of a poet named Cristina Campo. She's an Italian poet, 1923 to 1975. And there's a group of translations that I did that just came out on BlazeVox. And this is the fourth one in the 11 poem sequence. It remains down there, warm, life, air the color of my eyes, time burning at the bottom of every wind, living
I think he's frozen on his big moment because I thought it was me for a minute. Hang on, Dennis, you froze.
The caress that I do not find anymore.
Maybe data got to him, Mark.
I think that's quite data, actually.
Yeah, I like the presentation of that.
I think-
Dennis.
We'll give it another shot toward the end. Let's try something else in the interim.
Yeah. Dennis, if you can hear us, we'll put you on again a bit later. Sometimes it's better if you turn your video off because it doesn't stress the internet as much, but we'll give it a go.
Am I okay now?
No, we see you sound very electronic.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we'll go with the brilliant DeWitt, always reliable, always in his chair, always fantastic. DeWitt.
Okay. Nobody's mentioned it, but the word was out that Gerald Stern died today. When I knew him, he was the true troubadour. This is a poem called The Singer. I walk the wooded MDC bike path, either down the north bank of the Charles towards Boston, then cross the bridge at Watertown Square and return on the southern path, or vice versa for variety. Home and back takes an hour. Once used by joggers mainly and bikers. Now, since apartment complexes have replaced the backs of deserted factories and commercial lots, the path attracts all sorts. The river is its own attraction. Some locals fish from midstream and hip waders. Sometimes kayakers will lay in from the dam upstream, then portage around the dam just before the square. Still no swimming allowed after years of fighting pollution. Squirrels, rabbits, snapping turtles, and songbirds inhabit the shores, while ducks, gabbling geese, a pair of swans, and the rare blue heron fly, swim, and feed in the water. Flocks of seagulls fly inland to fish, especially at the dams. People sit or muse on benches. I walk usually eyes down, as if absorbed in thought. As strangers approach, I avoid direct looks, leave each to his or her own. They're just fellow walkers, talking to each other perhaps, or on their cell phones, or lost in music on earbuds. I feel crowded by those who only creep past and those I take long minutes to pass. I smile at dogs on leashes and babies in strollers. On hot days, I savor the corridor's shade, breezes, glowing leaves and shifting light, the rush of flowing water. There's a stench behind an animal hospital where dogs bark as if crying for rescue while keepers shout them down or try to. Their muffled clamor carries for a distance. Joggers approach swiftly from behind. Bicyclists call, on your left. On the south path, seniors from a nursing home gather in a clearing with picnic tables and speak Russian to each other, or spread along the path, shuffling with walkers. Electric skateboards are a novelty. Teens riding like surfers, arms crossed, faster than bikes. One perfect day after rain, I'm surprised by singing, which seems to join my spirit in response to fresh air, trees, river, and sky. The voice is human, a woman's, not a radio or iPhone, not rap chanted to a beat. There is one regular biker who races with rap blurring from his handlebars, a rude disturber of the peace. But opera, which I don't usually like, pure and outpouring. I see the singer's back, draw near and pass, keeping my pace, eyes down. She is Asian and wears a silk kimono like a costume and remains absorbed in her song, which continues unbroken. Puccini, I think. The word's Italian. Her voice is trained, perfectly modulated and pitched. She must be rehearsing. Perhaps performs with Boston Opera Company. Perhaps she lives nearby or is on tour visiting. Her music fades behind me. Back home, when I tell my wife, she asks, "Why didn't you stop and compliment her?" A week later, I overtake her, still singing, but on the next footbridge and behind the apartments. She wears a floppy sun hat, like a gardening hat, a white top, shirt tails out, baggy slacks, and sneakers without socks. She is thin, frail, and elderly, though younger than me. Her hair is white, tied back, her face wrinkled. I stop and make eye contact. "Thank you. Your voice is beautiful," I say. She seems startled and embarrassed, then politely smiles and nods. "Thank you," she says, as if unused to English. I smile and turn and leave her out of respect. I don't remember hearing her voice resume behind me. I've never found her since.
Oh, the end of that one gets me every time. It's so mournful, but I love the kind of vignette over Boston and then this beautiful bright spark of Puccini. It's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, DeWitt. We are going to turn to the amazing John Wesseck. He's always got something for us. We never quite know what. It's always coupled with a pretty good t-shirt as well.
I never know what either. Here's another book from the another poem
Yep,
from
I've
the.
got my copy. I'll twin you with my copy as well.
Oh, cool, excellent. Called At the Local Book Display. She was the kind of woman I'd always wanted. Her ample volume on display in the glass case. I imagined my hardcover next to hers on Barnes and Noble shelves, her colorful dust jacket wrapped around me. I wanted to caress her perfect bound spine, slip my fingers between her pages. "Which one's yours?" she asked. I pointed to a homemade poetry pamphlet, 25 Xerox pages held together by staples. My dreams of the New York Times bestseller list went limp. "Don't worry, it happens to lots of guys," she said. "What you gotta do is go to a bookstore, find out what everybody else is writing, and write the same thing. Chicken soup books are really hot now." I saw what my life with her would be like. Each day I'd join the faceless drones at Mediocrity Corporation and toil to pay for a tract home that looks like all the others. I wandered to the buffet table and took a cube of Swiss cheese speared on a toothpick. When no one was looking, I slipped out the door and ran.
Absolutely love it. Why doesn't anyone spear their cheese with toothpicks anymore? I don't know. Like, and you used to get a little cocktail onion sometimes if you were somewhere really special. But no, I love find out what everyone else is writing and write the same thing. I think some of my students are still writing Twilight vampire narratives despite all of that advice. So I'm going to give it to them again through your piece. Thank you, John. Will we go back, Dennis? I think you've got your video and I'm not sure whether you've got your sound happening. Do you want to unmute and see if you can get it to work? I've just asked him to unmute. I don't know. I think he's having trouble with his earphones. He's staring at me like he has no idea what I'm saying. I'm like, I will move on. I will move on to the poet Cat. She looks amazing. She always looks amazing. This week she's got something special because she's got some cat ears and a new hairdo, and I love it. And she has a new book coming out, but we don't have it yet, or I'm promised that I will flash that one as well. So Cindy, you badass poet, you get up next.
Today I'm the badass cat, and
it matches your cat cushion. I love that.
That's right. And I have something special today because I wanted to read something for Halloween. And I don't have any Halloween poems, but Bob Heeman and I did a collaboration that references Halloween. So I dug it up. So today you get a double dose of Heeman.
We love a double dose of Heeman. Who doesn't?
Exactly. And not only that, but I should mention that this is Bob Heeman's shirt, but I'm not gonna get into that.
Whoa, okay. Wow, we'll take that offline, Cindy.
With the cat, theme. This is number 23 from our book, The Number 5 is Always Suspect, for which Bob did the collage on the cover and collaborated with me on the poems. On All Hallows Eve, the poets dress up like poets and try to imagine they are nothing more than forgotten owls, hooting and hollering their wise words from the branches as they watch the black cats disappear into the underbrush. The poets dress up like Edgar Allan Poe, then put on owl heads to scare the dreamers. But the experimental poets refuse to be owls, preferring instead to dress like algebraic equations. Oh, don't try to figure out the calculus of poets. Too often it's no more than barn plus 5. That was Bob's line. I still don't know what it means. And algorithms of darkness in an infinite limit, with the only correct answer a smaller circle. On All Hallows Eve, the poets don't need masks. Their words can hide them or reveal them. Thank you. Happy Halloween.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I love the poets dressing up like Edgar Allan Poe and putting on owl heads. That could only be a Cindy Bob collaboration, that poem.
Is this Dada? Maybe this is Dada.
Maybe. Excellent. Thank you. Well, we've come to our last spot in the open mic because unfortunately Dennis can't get his microphone to work or speakers to work. But it's time for Bob. We had a little taste there with his collaboration with Cindy. We've even seen his shirt on Cindy, which we'll have to get the gossip about that later. But he's going to give us something at the end of this lip balm to take with us that's sometimes bizarre, sometimes something you can ruminate on. It's always fantastic. Bob, over to you in the kitchen.
But it's always information.
Well, it's not always information though. He slips in a non-information every now and then.
Okay, this is actually brand new information.
Wow.
First of all, thanks, Sin, for sharing our collaboration. And it's actually a former shirt. She's had it for a few years now. So anyway.
I still think that's worthy of some gossiping later on.
Information. What was hidden no more than a space where the air could be held and measured, a space where the light never reached unless a lamp were lit, a space where men and women gathered, waiting to be bathed or fed. It was a space where the stories began, where the river was constructed from the rain that was left over, where bread had been invented as a substitute for the apples and pears that grew increasingly rare. It was a space where written words were first pronounced and shared, a space where a drawing on the wall was thought to be the same as the animal it portrayed, a space where music filled the corners until there was no longer a place to hide.
Loved it. Oh my goodness. A space where the stories began. Always love taking your poems with me for the rest of my day, Bob. They're always amazing. You always read them so well. Thank you. I think maybe the kitchen has good acoustics. I'm gonna maybe think that's why it sounds extra good today. Mark, back to you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn, Shira, Caroline, Erika, for a wonderful feature today. I'm going to close up with a short poem from my new book, which just came out from Gazebo in Australia. There might be a moon or a dog. And this is just called Just Toast, Not Just. The day before yesterday, you remember when all the roofs were coated in some form of shadowy dust, and we were sitting in the botanical garden sketching all kinds of fruit. I went to the toilet, splashed cold water on my face. And do you remember the green apples we saw at the farmer's market afterward? I imagined the turrets of 1,000 temples rising over the hills in prayer, and the uneasy, whiny voice of a thin man calling us to the table. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful night. Wish you all the best. Lots of love, poetry, and health. And see you next time at the Dada Festival next weekend, hopefully. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Good morning from Australia.
Good day.
Good